You might have noticed that recently I've been posting quite a few random lore theories for Star Rail. The way that it works is that sometimes I'd be covering a particular topic, and while doing research about that topic, I learn about a small fact or tidbit that makes me think of something else entirely. Now, I know I've covered Akivili and the Astral Express quite a few times now, but when I was working on the navigator video, something rather interesting came up. As most of you know, Akivili is said to have died off before the events of the main story, and the circumstances of their death has been shrouded in mystery. There are even some that believe Akivili isn't truly dead and perhaps hiding or weakened in some way. Well, what if I were to tell you that not only is Akivili still around, but instead of the trailblaze, Akivili may now actually be associated with finality? Not only that, what if Akivili is actually Terminus? That's what we'll be discussing in this video. Before we do though, if you want to see more Honkai Star Rail content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Also, I started doing a weekly stream, so if you're interested in that, do check out the live or community tab on the channel page for the schedule. By this point, most of you are likely familiar with Akivili, the path of trailblazing, and the nameless. Despite that, I still need to do a bit of an introduction on these topics just in case whoever is watching isn't too familiar with some of these things, as Star Rail's lore isn't necessarily front and center. So even if you know some of these things already, just bear with me and keep them in mind for now, as they will come up later in the video. Let's start off with Akivili's origins. Akivili was said to have ascended from the remote planet of Pegana. The planet was far removed from much of the universe and is the origin point of the silver rails that the Astral Express uses. While we don't know the full story behind their ascension, it was said that Akivili wanted to leave their remote planet in search of the endpoint of the Tree of Existence. Their thirst for adventure and a need to explore the unknowable likely triggered their ascension into an aeon, and from then on, the path of Trailblaze was born. Akivili traveled from world to world, and with each new location, they would inspire mortals who wished to follow in their footsteps. This is how the Nameless were formed. Now, Terminus, on the other hand, is the aeon of finality. If you thought we knew little about Akivili, we know even less about Terminus. I mean, we don't even really know what finality truly represents or what Terminus even looks like. We can, however, make a few guesses related to this aeon and its path based on a few things we learn in-game. As far as the followers of finality is concerned, namely the Omen Vanguards, Terminus represents the very end of everything. They are the final point in all of existence, and their true form resides at the very end of time itself. Terminus is said to be traveling back in time, as its mission, supposedly, is to ensure a very specific set of events take place so that the future in which they reside in becomes reality. Because of this, Terminus seemingly knows the future, and why Elio, who is said to be able to see the future, is suspected to be a follower of finality. Now that expositions are out of the way, let's get back to the main topic of the video. As I mentioned earlier, this whole idea of Akivili being Terminus started off because of something I found while researching one of the past Astral Express navigators. IC was a navigator for the Astral Express around the time that Akivili had just died, and the Nameless were in all-out turmoil. I'm not going to go through the specifics of his life story, as I already did that in the other video, but what's important about him as far as this topic is concerned isn't his time with the Nameless, but rather when he left them. You see, when IC stepped down as a navigator, he also left the path of the Trailblaze and began following finality. After he made the switch, IC was also said to have been one of the founding members of the Omen Vanguards, one of the factions who follow Terminus. The timing seems rather convenient that right after Akivili died, one of the navigators of the Express would not only leave the Nameless, but suddenly start following Terminus and finality. On top of that, they also seem to have been involved in building an entirely new faction to follow this aeon. Perhaps IC knows something we don't, and this transition from Trailblaze to finality isn't a betrayal, but just IC following his ex-boss into another company. Now you might ask, well, if that were the case, why didn't the other Nameless do the same? Well, first off, there's nothing to say that some of them didn't, but if you read IC's navigator profile, you'd also learn that the Nameless at the time were on the verge of collapsing. Many of them had left after Akivilis' disappearance or death, while others were caught up with infighting as each claimed to know the will of the Trailblaze better. Very few actually remained on the Express, so by the time IC left, it's likely only a handful were even around, and some of those leftovers might have actually followed him. The problem with this is that IC's story is said to have been altered by the Enigmata's history fictionologist. Since we can't fully trust his backstory, this theory should functionally be dead in the water, right? Well, the thing is, of all the navigators that we learn about in the Cosmodesy event, IC is the only one with an altered backstory. While it does indeed mean we can't trust it fully, it also means that there might be something being purposely obscured here. Something about Akivili and Terminus that Mythos and the Enigmata don't want other people to know. Also, with how knowledgeable the Stellaron Hunters and Elio are about the Nameless, I also can't help but wonder if Elio got this information through IC, since Elio is thought to also follow Terminus and IC used to be a navigator. Aside from that, there's actually quite a few other hints at this idea being possibly true, because the more I looked into it, the more in common Akivili seemed to have with Terminus. In terms of ideology, you might think that Akivili and Terminus have little to do with one another. One is about adventure, exploration, and piercing through the unknowable, while the other is about a fixed ending, prophecies, and conclusions. But if you think about how they act within the universe, both these eons are almost like mirrors to one another in terms of how they operate. Akivili travels from point A to point B and so on as they travel through the cosmos on their way to the edge of the Tree of Existence, while Terminus is functionally doing the exact opposite, going backwards through time from the end of the universe to the present day. If we think of it as a journey, Akivili is going from start to finish, while Terminus is the reverse of that. Then ask yourself this question: is trailblazing about the journey or the destination? If you were to look at how the Nameless function, you might be inclined to say it's about the journey, right? I mean, that's how the past and even current Nameless have been doing things. But recall what I said earlier about Akivili's origins. Akivili ascended because it was in search of the endpoint of the Tree of Existence. If they only cared about the journey, it wouldn't have had such a goal in the first place and would just travel to unknown locales for the sake of it. Now, I'm not saying the journey isn't the focus here, but purely based on Akivili's supposed ascension story, it seems they ascended purely to reach a specific destination. But then how can it be that the Nameless do not follow the same goals as their aeon, since their aeon is focused on the final destination, but the Nameless focuses on the journey? Well, it's not uncommon for a faction to not follow exactly what their aeon is doing. Perhaps the Nameless simply misunderstood Akivili and assumed the journey was more important and why we see them act the way they do. I mean, followers of preservation don't necessarily aim to preserve everything, and even the followers of destruction like Duke Inferno is choosy with what they destroy. So why am I bringing this up? What has this journey versus destination conversation got to do with anything? Well, if the journey is the focus of trailblazing, then it means that the Nameless have little to do or have any commonality with finality. But if the destination is the point of it all, then it's almost practically the same with how Terminus thinks, who only concerns themselves with the ending they want. That is, they focus only on a specific destination of their story. I know it's not an exact approximation, but the final destination and final ending can be somewhat analogous in this context, and I think you kinda get what I'm trying to claim here. But then you might ask, how could Akivili possibly be Terminus? Can an aeon just change who they are and what they believe in? Aren't the paths all governed by the Primormobile, making it impossible for aeons to move away from what their paths stand for? In general, yes, but Akivili has always been unique, even among the aeons. They go wherever they wish, do whatever they want, and would often deal with mortals, and many in the lore have pointed this out on several occasions. On top of that, the path of Trailblaze itself is pretty unique. You see, most aeons have a practically unachievable goal. Qlipoth wants to preserve everything in the universe, but as the universe grows, more and more things need to be preserved, making it an unending goal. Then you have aeons like Aha, who just wants to have fun and find the maximum enjoyment in life, which again isn't something tangibly achievable. What I'm trying to get at is that despite each path representing something, most of them are pretty difficult to complete. Finding maximum enjoyment, for example, is never ending, as there will always be a bigger high to chase. Akivili, on the other hand, has a goal that is entirely achievable. If the point of trailblazing is indeed a destination, what would happen if Akivili did reach their destination goal and find the endpoint of the Tree of Existence? Perhaps there is a yet to be understood mechanism that allows them to change their purpose once they have completed it. Maybe Akivili is the very first aeon to achieve this, and by freeing themselves from the path of trailblaze, their purpose changes to one of finality, having transitioned from journey to final destination. We also know that there are 3 ways an aeon can die. Either they get killed off by another aeon, they get absorbed when their paths overlap with others, or the third way, which is an unknown at this point. I'm not discounting that Akivili could have been killed, but being absorbed is unlikely since the path of trailblaze still exists. So perhaps this falls into the third category. One way an aeon can be killed is if they no longer exist as what they were before, and why Akivilis' disappearance is considered unique or strange within the context of the lore. That said, while there are a few similarities between these 2 aeons, the fact remains that we know too little about either of them to definitively say this is true. There are also a few things that might poke holes in this very idea. Firstly, IC's backstory may have had too many changes, and perhaps he didn't even join the finality, let alone establish the Omen Vanguards. It's also possible that IC joined the finality for completely other reasons, and it has nothing to do with Akivili. We also can't be sure that the Nameless really misunderstood the path of Trailblaze, since some of them are Pathstriders, and even March and the main character gain protections from it. So for now, this just remains as a neat little theory rather than actual fact, so don't take this too seriously. Whether or not Akivili is indeed Terminus or related to finality, I truly don't know. But they do seem to share quite a few commonalities between them, and their timelines seem to overlap. Plus, since both Terminus and Akivilis' appearances have yet to be revealed, it might be a hint that something actually ties them together. Maybe if you see them side by side, there are hints that they are one and the same. We'll just have to wait and see once the story unfolds further to really know the truth. With that, I'll end the video here. Do you think Akivili is truly Terminus, or is the simplest solution of them just being gone the one that makes the most sense? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed watching the video, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.